Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with How I Discovered Dvorak. Pardon my creaky, even more creaky than usual voice here. I don't know what's going on. It's bad weather and allergies and stuff, and oh my goodness. But that never stopped me, so what the hell? How did I discover Dvorak? Well, probably like a lot of you did, through the New World Symphony, the recording that I had when I was a little tyke. Under the age of 10, came from my mother's collection, as so many recordings did. It was Arturo Toscanini's with the NBC Symphony. And in those days, Dvorak's New World Symphony was still known as Symphony Number 5. It was only much later that it became Symphony Number 9. And part of my discovery of Dvorak involved figuring out that the New World Symphony was actually Symphony Number 9 and not Number 5. Because what happened was this. I really had no particular interest in Dvorak per se. I liked the New World Symphony, but going further than that, as a little kid, I figured, I didn't know what further meant. Did any of us? We didn't know who he was, what he wrote, what, the entire, sort of sense of his oeuvre. It was an unknown oeuvre, and I wasn't getting to know it particularly well. I had other things on my mind when I was that age, like, making a little money cutting lawns and doing other stuff like that. However, there was a branch of Goodwill Industries, and I've told this story before because what a resource this was, in Milford, good old Milford, Connecticut, and I used to bicycle downtown, and Goodwill had used records. A strange and eclectic selection of used records. I think the weirdest of them all was Bruckner's Fifth Symphony with Gerhard Pfluger on Urania, back when Urania was like a real label and not what it is now, just sort of, grabbing and reissuing public domain stuff. Anyway, so I was trudging through, scrolling through the used LPs, because that's what they were in those days. And I saw all this stuff by Dvorak. I was just looking for classical music. I didn't care what classical music. I knew I liked classical music. I'd gotten into it very, very young, as I've explained a million times. And I just wanted to find something. So there was classical, a strange selection of classical. And I would look whatever didn't look too worn out, because these were really used. Some of these things were pretty grotty looking. And in there was like all kinds of Dvorak symphonies and things by people I'd never heard of and couldn't pronounce. There was Karel Shana, there was Smetacek and Václav Neumann and, Talich and all this. Somebody had a big pile of Superphon or Urania or just strange, whatever the import labels were in those days. And they dumped them at Goodwill. How they got to Milford, who it was, I would give anything to find out. Just how these things arrived at Goodwill Industries in Milford, Connecticut. But as a result of this, I got all the other Dvorak symphonies. And I saw that I knew Number 5, and there was like 6 and 7 and 8 and 4 and 3 and 2 and 1, and all the numbers were jumbled up, and it was all terribly confusing. And of course, fortunately LPs, they had notes on the back of the LP. So you could read the notes on the back of the LP and you could figure out what was going on. And I realized, oh, wow, he wrote 9 symphonies, but 4 of them were practically unknown. And then the others were all mixed up in terms of their numbering. So I bought them all for like a quarter. That's what it cost. They were like up to 5 cents each in those days, the used LPs. And I stuck them on my handlebars because I had no basket or anything. I just had this, I put them in a bag and wrapped it up and put it on my handlebars and chucked home with them. And I just started listening to them. And so interestingly enough, my experience of Dvorak, my initial experience of Dvorak was actually, it predated Brahms, except for the First Symphony, and lots of Beethoven and lots of everything else. Of course, my mother had some of this stuff in her collection too. But in terms of my own record collecting, probably the first composer I ever got a hold of was Dvorak, and I had a special affection because of that, number one. And it was weird Dvorak. It was the early symphonies, the ones nobody knew. And I put them on and they were gorgeous. Oh my goodness, they were so beautiful. I remember, things that stuck in my head, strange and interesting, evocative orchestral textures, like the very end of the Second Symphony. It's going ba 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 da da dum. And then there's like a trill on the cellos and basses. Dum dum like that. It's really sort of this dark undercurrent that undermines that triumphant final conclusion. Very strange. Very interesting. Nobody ever did anything like it. Nobody did it again. It's absolutely unique to Dvorak's Second Symphony. Things like, or the opening tune of the third. Da 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 da. I shouldn't even attempt it, should I? No, I shouldn't. But wow. I mean, these beautiful tunes and the lovely orchestration. And I mean, they just hit me immediately. It was such a normal, nice thing. So I had these early versions. And let's see, Mom also had Dvorak's Eighth, which in those days was the fourth, with Charles Munch and the Boston Symphony, the RCA recording, which is really hot, hot, hot. Some people scream that he's not using the correct edition, but I don't care. It's a fabulous performance. Absolutely marvelous. And so that one I knew. And there were a few other things that got it, that, sort of flitted by here and there, like the humoresque. Da, 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 da. That was a song that my brother learned in summer camp. It was the Dvorak humorous, like a bike, but so much cuter is my little something scooter. I mean, it was the Dvorak humoresque. It was a little kiddie song, and there were some other things. But I have to say, as I got older and got into it more, there is no composer who is more rewarding when you're trying to make discoveries, because Dvorak wrote a ton of music, and he wrote music in every single possible medium available in the 19th century, except for ballet. But he did operas and all that stuff. And he wrote masterpieces in every single medium that he touched. He was the Romantic composer's Romantic era's most versatile genius, as I say in my book on Dvorak. There's very little you can dip into and not find great stuff. So I started to expand. First, when I started to have actual abilities to buy record things, I got the Kertész box. It was nine LPs in those days, a nice big box, a chunky box full of all the symphonies, plus, other shorter works. They were all just wonderful. The tone poems and then the overtures and the Slavonic dances. Oh, wow. George Szell, Cleveland Orchestra. I had the Slavonic dances, and then Raphael Kubelik. I mean, really, you also have, in addition to a body of work which is extraordinary, really, really good performances by major artists, and they're not hard to find. So I could expand my knowledge. The funny thing about first hearing the New World Symphony, and I remember this very, very clearly, is that what hooked me was not any of the most famous tunes, not the tune of the Largo, which was really pretty. I mean, I liked it, or the Scherzo, which is, zippy and sounds a little bit like, well, it was Wild West music in some ways and whatnot. No, it wasn't any of that. It was the transition theme in the first movement between the first subject and the second subject, both of which are more famous than the transition theme. But it was that theme that hooked me. Da 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 dum ba da 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 dum ba da 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 dum. That one, because it had this. I don't know how to describe it. It had this sort of ancient, fundamental, or as they say in German, this sort of or motive type sound to it. I mean, it just sounded like something that had existed since the dawn of time. It had a sort of magical, maybe sort of fairy tale quality. I don't know. But when I was a little kid and I heard that tune, and even when I still hear it, it just transports me elsewhere. It's an amazing little thing. And that's a throwaway tune in the course of the symphony. It's not something that, it's not one of the main themes of the movement. It doesn't feature in the development section. It's just there. And that's one of the things that I loved so much about Dvorak. The fact that, even when he isn't, trying, he still comes out with fabulous melodies. Everything about his music is lyrical and luscious and tuneful and songful, and oh my God, could he write tunes? I mean, Brahms was like horrified that he could write such gorgeous tunes. He was struck with admiration, and so has everyone been since, basically. But Dvorak was also a very solid composer in the meat and potatoes symphonic style, in writing development sections and working with his material, and much, much, much more ingenious than people give him credit for being, because the tunes are so beautiful. Nobody bothers to give him credit for having done anything else, but he did a lot else. I mean, he was a major student of Beethoven, and he understood, what symphonic arguments were supposed to be, and he understood structure. And I mean, he wasn't as polished, for example, as Brahms was in some things, but he had a much wider range of reference. I mean, a much wider emotional range, a much broader vision for what music could be than Brahms did. And so, these comparisons are always kind of odious, because greatness is greatness, and it makes really no difference comparing one greatness to another greatness. They're both great. But Dvorak really was a much deeper composer than a lot of people give him credit for being. He wasn't just a simple Czech peasant tunesmith, blobbity, 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 blop, So as I discovered more and more and more Dvorak, I kept being struck by the fact that so much of it is just wonderful, amazing, great, great music. And I have maintained that position ever since, and hopefully have shared it with you all. I'm very interested to know how you discovered Dvorak, and particularly what works by him. If you went into it with any more, sort of seriousness or devotion, what surprised you? What you heard by him that you never expected to encounter? For me, I'll throw out one right away: the trio in F minor. Everybody listens to the Dumke trio, but the other one, the piano trio in F minor, number 3, is probably the greatest piano trio written in the entire 19th century. I mean, it's unbelievably fabulous. I mean, not just tuneful, but strong and passionate and perfectly constructed. And oh my God, what a great piece! And those are the kinds of things that make the discovery of composers like Dvorak just so marvelous. So please tell me, what was your big Dvorak find? Keep on listening, friends, and thank you so much for joining me. Take care.